ignoring the economic plight of their citizens. So that makes me sad.
As Canadians, what do we have to offer the world in terms of space exploration, and bringing things together?
If there is one country in the world that should know something about exploration, it is Canada. So our country was founded on early explorers. So the indigenous people, the Vikings, and then the explorers from Europe. I read their biographies. So Sir Alexander Mackenzie, Simon Fraser, David Thompson. These were great explorers who did incredible things, opened up the country, so that today, in today's 21st century society, we have major cities in Canada, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Vancouver, Calgary, that are thriving today, thanks to our forebears, the explorers, the settlers, the pioneers, the homesteaders. My grandfather was a homesteader. And so I think that that's part of the Canadian mindset, that we're a can-do group of people. We can endure harsh climates, cold climates, to open up new frontiers. And when I say frontier, I'm not just talking about geographical frontiers. I'm talking about space frontiers. I'm talking about science and medicine, technology frontiers. Canadians have this attitude that we should be pushing back these frontiers. Now, having said that, I find recently that in the ICT age, the information age that we live in, we're not getting out and exploring as much as we should. We're not getting out of our comfort zones. We're not pushing ourselves enough mentally, physically, emotionally. And I think that's an important trait to continue to advocate for. But Canada should also lead the world in terms of inspiring us to take on these challenges. And one way we can do that, and one thing that I'm proud about Canada, is that we're a world leader in dark sky preserves. So this wonder that I experienced as a child when I looked up at the sky and I saw the Milky Way and I could try to identify the constellations, we're trying to find places within our country and encourage other countries as well, to make sure that the young people and the public in those regions and those countries have the opportunity to look up and wonder about, where did we come from? Where are we going? Are we alone? And how does all of this amazing universe function, and what's our place in it?
Just going back to your time on this International Space Station, that's a pretty confined space. And you have people from, Belgium, Russia, different places. How do you get along? And is there something about you as a Canadian that helps that?
In the early days of the space program, all of the astronauts and early cosmonauts were the same. They were all male, Caucasian, military test pilots. And today, because of the broader spectrum of activities that we do in space, astronauts come from a variety of professions: scientists, engineers, medical doctors, aviators, even recently school teachers as well. From a variety of nations, as you mentioned, but also cultures and ethnicities and religious beliefs and political ideologies and ways that you solve problems. And we all have to come together to rally around the mission objectives. So the training for an astronaut, and also being selected as an astronaut, spends a lot of time looking at the personality traits of the individual astronauts. Just as important as the technical traits of robotics or spacewalking or rendezvous or docking. So the personality traits that are important to be an astronaut are self-care, self-management, teamwork, group living, followership, leadership, cross-cultural sensitivity, diplomacy, mediation. Those are the traits that we select astronauts for, and that we continue to train on once we do become astronauts. We put ourselves into tough situations as a crew in a wilderness, perhaps, where we don't have enough food, we don't have enough water, or we're cold, and we become familiar with our weaknesses and our crew members' weaknesses, and in spite of that, we have an objective to get from point A to point B. And how do we deal with these conflicts that inevitably arise, so that we keep focused and on the mission objectives, and that we learn all kinds of skills, conflict management skills, good communication, airing expectations, compromising, like a good marriage. So those are the skills that we develop. The other thing to mention is that I find that astronauts, no matter what country you come from, no matter what culture you come from, we're very like-minded. We all have this mentality of exploration, that we need to constantly be out of our comfort zone, that space exploration is important to motivate the public to attack some of the tough social problems, to inspire the young people to take on audacious challenges and consider STEM as an educational path and a career path as well. So yes, if I'm meeting a Russian in downtown Moscow, there may be some cultural clashes with them, but not with Russian cosmonauts. We're very like-minded. We all have this common vision that we like to extend human capability into space.
Is there something about who we are as Canadians that contributes to that?
So some of the skills that you need to be a good long-duration astronaut, and for example, an upcoming mission to Mars will be a 2.5-year mission in an isolated and confined environment, include courtesy, politeness, diplomacy, mediation skills, cross-cultural sensitivity. That's quintessentially what a Canadian is. So I like to think that I've got half of my training done already, just from my birth certificate. What I just described, not all cultures elsewhere in the world exemplify those kinds of personality traits. So what I just said is biased, of course, but I do think that the quintessential Canadian culture is an asset if you wish to be a long-duration space explorer.
In a sense, if 6 astronauts can get along for long periods of time in the International Space Station, does that give us an example of what we could do to get along on Earth with all our millions and billions of people?
I'm really worried about some of the recent geopolitical rhetoric that's going on in the world right now. It displeases me. I find that civilization is backsliding to the me first kind of mentality, tribalism, extreme nationalism, and it's not the way for us to go forward. There's a lot of global problems out there that are threatening the well-being and perhaps even the survival of humanity. Climate change is the classic example. There is no one nation in the world that has the ability to solve these big problems. It's only when we come together across cultures and across national borders and pool our expertise, pool our resources, pool the abilities of our young people to address these issues that we're going to solve some of these problems that are facing society. So yes, the experience of the International Space Station and hopefully international venture to explore the moon and Mars again is an allegory. It's a metaphor for how humanity should work here on Earth as well. It functions well in space. The political clashes that Canadian politicians have with the politicians of the other ISS member countries are not discussed on orbit. We just have this vision that we want to extend human capability in space and inspire the young people and encourage society to take on the tough challenges on the Earth.
You retired a few years ago from the Canadian Space Agency, but now you're back doing some work for them. And it has to do with the future mission to Mars. What's your role?
Once an astronaut, always an astronaut. And yes, I did retire a few years ago, which means I no longer make a salary from my former employer, the Canadian Space Agency. But I have this desire to keep pushing Canada forward in space exploration. It must be part of my DNA, I'm not sure. But the next big venture in space, the ultimate destination, the dream, is Mars. And I really believe that in the next 15, maybe 20 years, that we will have human beings walk on the surface of Mars. To see whether or not life existed on Mars at one time, to study the geology of the planet, to see how that implicates or impacts the past, the present, and the future of Earth's planetary evolution, and to see whether or not Mars could someday be a safe second home for humanity as well. But there's a number of reasons why we cannot go to Mars today, a number of technological reasons why we can't go, political reasons why we can't go, but also medical reasons why we can't go. Canada has one of the strongest medical training programs in the world. We also excel in clinical research. So I'm trying to harness this healthcare training and healthcare delivery talent that we have in Canada, and propose that Canada play a leadership role in healthcare delivery for the future deep space astronauts. It's something that we can take on. Of course, we have to convince the rest of Canada this is something that we should do, and also convince our other spacefaring partners, NASA and other partners, that this is something that Canada is up to taking on. So I'm leading a task force right now, and we're addressing all of the issues and trying to put together a plan that we can present to the federal government and to the other international partners to see what and get their reaction.
So let's delve into that a little bit more. What would be some of the health challenges? Because it's quite a long mission just to get from Earth to Mars. What do you do if you catch a cold, or somebody gets sick, or heaven forbid dies?
Using conventional rockets, then the trip to Mars will be 6 to 8 months. From Earth to Mars, probably a 400 million kilometer journey. And once you're there, then the time lag, the latency in communication for voice and also for data is anywhere from 7 to 20 minutes. So for example, if you were on Mars and I'm at mission control on Earth and I said good morning to you, it would take up to 20 minutes for you to hear me say good morning, and another 20 minutes for me to hear your good morning in reply. So imagine that you and your crew members suddenly had a medical urgency on the Mars habitat. You can't call Earth